Alright, my name is Cody Grant, and this is my History 132 online final project. The topic of choice was the Korean War. The Korean War began in 1950 and lasted until 1953. It began as a civil war between North and South Korea. The U.S. and its allies were against Soviet Russia and its communist allies, notably the PRC, which was the People's Republic of China. The Korean conflict directly stemmed out of a PRC attack on Korea in form of leading the North Koreans into communism, whereas the South Koreans were aptly against it. This is notably the first conflict of the Cold War era, and it is also the first UN-sanctioned conflict. The two sources I used to obtain this knowledge was history.state.gov and georgewashingtonuniversity.edu. Continuing on, I was able to get my hands on a Korean War veteran himself. This is a man, Jim Bryant. He was in the United States Air Force at the time. I knew Jim Bryant personally before the interview, but I simply knew him as an acquaintance or perhaps a colleague, and not so much as a dear friend. However, during my interview with him, I learned a lot more about him, and I learned quickly that he very much enjoys telling his stories. So going into this, I had some expectations. I knew that he was in the Korean War. I knew that he was involved in the Air Force. I knew he had some sort of story to tell. But I was also very unaware as to the full extent of what I would experience under the direct tutelage of this man. So I can say I was happily surprised by the information he bestowed upon me in our meeting. Comparing his story and the research I found, I have some bullet points here which I will quickly summarize. Given the research, it provided me with many hard facts, not led by bias. It allowed for accurate counts of when the conflict started and the totals as far as death rate or which countries were directly involved. It kept things methodical and impersonal, and it provided me with a base to build my topic upon. Jumping over to Mr. Jim Bryant, who was the veteran at hand, he provided me with first-hand account of the ongoing events. He took this from being impersonal to very personal. He allowed for vivid recreations of many battlefield experiences. He provided insight on lightly covered topics in research, such as dodge drafting and how that affects a family. He even told me a story about how the FBI came to his house thinking he was dodging the draft when he was drafted into the Marines, only to find out that he instead chose to enlist in the Air Force. And he also was able to produce vivid imagery through his recreation of his own personal experiences and hardships. One quote that I got directly from Jim Bryant was this: "It's my fear that the younger generation do not appreciate the sacrifice of so many that made this country great." So this stemmed off a conversation of General MacArthur, who you can see here in the picture, and it was very enlightening. It showed a sense of compassion yet sorrow for the way that the nation was going. He was afraid of what was happening to our great country as we, quote, progressed, unquote. Progression can take so many different forms and cannot always be for the country's best interest. So it allowed for a new perspective on what was going on meeting with someone who personally experienced it allowed me to, in some indirect way, also experience it and connect very personally with the conflict itself. At this point, I will play brief audio recording that I had taken.
Well, I thought my general was Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur gave a famous speech about duty, honor, and country. And I tell you what's the truth, I wonder if the young people respect all those things today. We're a spoiled generation. So many people died to make this country what it is. So many people sacrificed heavily and lost everything from the founding fathers to all the way up to now. Now we got a whole generation, including sometimes I wonder about even our commander-in-chief, whether he does or not, but, you know.
So this was a brief recording that I took when meeting, or a brief excerpt from the recording I took when meeting with Jim Bryant. And you can see that he was very moved by the way that the country was going. He was very sincere in the way he talked. So that provoked a very intense reaction from me. It connected me very personally with the Korean War and the conflict surrounding it. So, knowledge is power, is what they say. And I can assure you that I received a lot of knowledge from this veteran, this working man, and this great American, Jim Bryant. I am very pleased to have had the experience to interview him and to work with him, and I'm very pleased to get first-hand accounts of something that means so much to me as American history. Being an American citizen myself, I believe it is invaluably important to know where we came from so we can better steer ourselves in the direction that we want to go. As far as this project is concerned, I would highly recommend it to future students and anyone taking a history course, simply because it takes you out of the classroom and into the real world. It turns things from hypothetical and hearsay. It turns things from an impersonal account to a very vivid and personal recreation. Without Jim Bryant, the Korean War would have just been another American conflict that I probably wouldn't have actually cared about, if we're being honest. But because of Jim Bryant, it became a real event that was very, very defining in this man's life and in the history of our country. This concludes my presentation, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this.